On the evening of September 16, 2010, a group of people got together to reminisce about memories that were made over 40 years ago. Some laughed while some cried, but that evening shed light on a special time that all of them shared. Perhaps it was a parallel of their country. Change was in the air and it involved many young lives. Something that was started with humble beginnings now stands tall as the pride of a community. While some students suspected, many had no idea that they were the start of something new, the creation of the Big Blue.
The purpose of a high school is not only to give people an education, but to encourage self-discovery and development of personal values and to help each individual to recognize human dignity in his fellow students.
In 1950, Cutoff High School and Lafourche High School were consolidated into one school. At that time, both of those communities were smaller than Golden Meadow. The Lafourche Cutoff High School in 1950 was a very successful venture. It later became known and is known today as LCO. Mid-1960s, the school board decided to do some consolidation in the parish. Integration had started. CM Washington High School had been closed and integrated into Thibodeau High School.
For years, you know, we had been watching all the problems with segregated schools and people fighting it. That didn't happen in South Lafourche.
I think the school board had great expectations. For example, some of the selling points was that we could have more course offerings because naturally you had more students. You would have a better athletic program because again you had more students who could be involved. In addition to that is that LCO was a school that was open in the 50s. Golden Meadow was a school that was open back in the 30s. So, you know, you keep on adding to old schools and you still have old schools. So people like the idea of a new school. And the thing is that not everybody was for consolidation.
In Golden Meadow, we were totally against it. I mean, I was against it. You know, everybody in Golden Meadow was totally. We did not want to lose our school identity.
There was always the thing in the back of your mind, you know, this could be a problem because the schools were different. We're only 12 miles apart, but they were different. Mr. Hebert was more liberal, more lenient about some things. Mr. Miller was strictly business, tough, you know, and everybody knew it. But it worked.
Mr. Miller was the principal. He had been principal there since the inception of the high school back in 1934, 1935. He had been there for 30-some years. Never had another principal at Golden Meadow, you know, as far as high school I'm talking about. So Mr. Hebert was chomping at the bit, and he was, a good selection for the school because he was young, he was energetic. The consolidation issue passed, and the voters approved the taxation of millage for the construction of the three schools.
When it was done, we went after it in the proper manner. In other words, we decided, look, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it in the right way.
And in those days, of course, I think our main goal was to get the faculty to gel, to make this thing work, make this consolidation work.
It was obvious at the very beginning that we needed to get not only the faculty and administration, but especially the student bodies working together.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, girl. You're crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time. Well, you ain't never caught a rabbit and you ain't no friend of mine. Well, they said you was high class. Well, that was just a lie. Yeah, they said you was high class. Well, that was just a lie. Yeah, you ain't never caught a rabbit and you ain't no friend of mine.
reason we're located in Galiana is because the Alain Liberton family had a lot of property here. They still do, in fact. They donated 50 acres of property right over here to the school, didn't cost the school board anything at all.
Once the consolidation was going to come into effect, we decided to put several groups of students together and talk about some of the things that we would have to institute in the new school.
We all had our thoughts and our ideas of the colors, and we all nominated them, and then I think it went out for a vote.
So you know, we're talking about respect for one another. We talk about getting together for the good of the community and coming up with the proper decisions that would help students for many, many years to come.
I think Mr. Guidry and Mr. Rabb were pretty instrumental in meeting a lot of times with some of their students, and some of the students mixed together, some of the parents, deciding on the mascot, deciding on the school colors.
As a matter of fact, some of these things that we have already, that we put together back in '65 and for the school opening in '66 are still in effect today. And for example, the student council, you know, that was one of the things we built around the student council. And in addition to that, we also wanted to have a high-class institution, one that our students would be very proud of, as would be the people in our community. And so we had a real tough job, you know. We were not going to make the decision and that was going to be final. What it was is that we were going to be part of the ownership. In other words, as a student, you know, what do you think the school should be called? Couldn't call it Golden Meadow, you couldn't call it Galiana, you couldn't call it Cutoff, or you couldn't call it La Rose because they already had schools. So we had to come up with a name. And the most popular names that came up right off at the beginning were Southern Lafourche, Lafourche Southern, and for some reason, it just didn't have the right ring to it. And they didn't like the syntax of it either. So we came up, after everybody was talking about it, came up with South Lafourche. And now you can't even think of anything else but that.
We definitely wanted something that was down by, and a tarpon is something to aim for, right? And I think that was important. I don't remember all the names that I thought. Lafourche Southern was so much classier than South Lafourche. But, you know, they said we couldn't do that. But we went with the South Lafourche, and I think it united.
We were also told we would have a say-so in the mascot. Well, when you take students and from the whole 10th Ward area and you put them together, they'll come up with all kind of names, you know, like for example the Bears, because this is Bayou Lous. Lous is a bear, and this property here was a Bayou Lous property. And so the Bear was one of the names that came up early.
Yeah, we broke it down to like 3, I think it was. I know one of them, the ones that I really didn't want, was the Golden Bears. You know, I said, man, no Golden Bears around here.
You don't want to be Golden Meadow part of it. You know.
Yeah, that's why Golden Meadow put
you
that
want no
golden in there.
What happened is that while we were all discussing it, as time went on, we'd had meetings at different schools. Somebody came up with the idea. I always suspected it was Mr. Hebert, because he was a pretty powerful person, you know, and came up with the idea of a tarpon. And as you know, in a fishing community, sports fishing in particular, the fighting tarpon, you know, it was just caught on right away.
Lloyd Guidry was my mentor. I had worked with him very closely at Golden Meadow, and he did a great thing with student council. He was so creative, but of course he's so good in working and bringing the best out of people, I think. And we worked almost a year, I believe, maybe even more. We'd get committees about what to call the school, whatever, you know, but it was always exciting and challenging, and I don't guess many people have those kind of challenges as a junior, and then knowing that you're going to be laying the foundation. But the faculties, 2 excellent faculties, merged together, and I think they displayed to all the students how well things can come together.
It was a very interesting time. The bar was set high. People had great expectations of the school, and from early on, John and I decided that we would try to get our students to take ownership of the school. That way we expected that things would go well.
My name is Easton Pete, and my job title, I was the proud first assistant principal of South Lafourche High School.
I'm Marjorie Landry, and I was librarian at South Lafourche High School.
My name is Jesse Guidry. I was a mathematics teacher here at South Lafourche High School during that first year when we opened up.
My name is Connie Kale, and my job title, I was first hired as a physical education teacher.
My name is Richard Weber. My first year at South Lafourche, when we consolidated, I taught 3 years at La Rose Cutoff, my wife and I both. And I had to teach the first class of Ag 1 at La Rose Cutoff, and then I drove over here and taught the majority of the day here.
I am Donna Plaisance, and I was an English teacher at South the first year. Actually, it was half a year. I went in, I just graduated from LSU and came in when someone left. So I had a journalism class and a couple of English classes.
Well, my name is Lloyd Guidry, and I was a teacher at Golden Meadow High School at the time of consolidation, when the community voted for consolidation.
We were a small school at Golden Meadow. I think we had maybe 70, 75 in our class, so we were very tight-knit, and we didn't know what to expect when we went to another school.
Golden Meadow was about half the size of LCO at the time. So I guess 85 of Golden Meadow seniors came in with maybe 150 or 60 LCO seniors. So it was a little overwhelming, but just the excitement. The library was bigger, the science labs were wonderful, the halls were great. It was an exciting time.
When South became available, it was the most practical thing to do. But it was also the best choice because it had such a good reputation. It was the prize to be able to work there. I love the high school mentality. I love the children, the students always impressed me.
The only vocational programs we had, which I was chairman of, was agriculture education, industrial arts, woodwork, diesel mechanics, and home economics. Oh, and ROTC. But ROTC building was not there. They had a little ramshackle building across the street.
I was always a librarian, but I was a librarian at La Rose Cutoff High School. And when La Rose Cutoff High School broke off and became South Lafourche High School, that's when I moved.
I loved teaching high school. I really did. I loved teaching the health aspects. I loved all the different sports. I was an athlete in high school, so I loved teaching basketball and baseball and the whole bit. I taught gymnastics. At that time we had a trampoline, we had uneven parallel bars, and I taught that.
One of the things that I remember in my first year as principal, or before I was principal, I was appointed and elected nominated by the school board in December of '65 as principal with Mr. Hebert. Mr. Hebert had been nominated or selected principal before that, and I was going to be his assistant. I came here during the break, I don't know, during the spring, and they were constructing this school. And I was walking around, and the school was not even halfway through. And the foreman, I forget his name now, came over and said, "Sir," he said, "can I help you? You looking for something?" I said, I'm the new assistant principal here. Could you tell me where my office? Oh, yeah. He said, come on over. So anyway, he showed me where my assistant principal's office was, which is over there. And I was, oh, man, I have an office for the first time in my life, you know?
I think maybe it's because of the administration at that time. The two faculties were both excellent. And they spent so much time preparing us to get ready that actually many of the LCO students got together with Golden Meta students so that we could combine our ideas for student council, 4-H, every club that existed at that time. But it was a time of unification maybe for the South Lafourche area. We had always been serious rivals, but of course we all hung out together because so many people that I knew well were from LaRose.
Well, the first year I saw it as a different point of view because I came in struggling to survive. And what they saw was also obvious, and it was 2 or 3 different communities coming together to become something new, and it was successful. There was, even though Mr. Hebert was the principal and people had come from Mr. Miller in Golden Meta, it became a new product.
As the last graduating class of Golden Meadow High School and LaRose Cutoff High School walked across the stage in 1966, reality began setting in for the juniors and sophomores. They were the beginning of a new era. South Lafourche High School was now their home for the next year and years to come. What would it be like? New classrooms, new teachers, new friends. Challenges were expected for the faculty and students, but an overriding sense of excitement was in the air. Sitting on acres of property along Bayou Lafourche, it was more than just a school. South Lafourche High School represented numerous hours of hard work, determination, and an entire community standing behind it.
South Lafourche High School was not completely constructed when school was getting ready to open. For instance, I can remember the auditorium was, we had to rope it off and not allow students to even go close by because there were so many people working the auditorium.
Yeah, going into a class that you didn't know half the people, that was something new. You know, and you looked around and said, who are all these people? You know,
And
will I
teachers
remember
as well,
their names?
New teachers too.
And new teachers, yeah, that's true, and not knowing how to react to them.
The cafeteria, we had very little equipment there. We had sandwiches, I don't know how long, 2, 3, 4 weeks. We had, you know, students ate sandwiches because that's all we had. We had no equipment.
It was all sandwiches for the first, I don't know if it was 6 weeks or 9 weeks, but it was like all sandwiches. The kitchen was not ready.
Bring your own.
Yeah, or bring your own, you know. And it was the compressed sandwich meat kind of, and, you know, everybody, you know, playing sports. I mean, the guys were big guys. I mean, they need a little more than a sandwich, you know.
I think we started off without air conditioning, if I can remember right, and perhaps sandwiches for lunch. But don't worry, Miss Trish was a great aunt of mine, and she got it together in a hurry.
Let me tell you about the first week. At that time, the air conditioning system wasn't operating, and I was in what they'd call B Hall at that time, and that's sort of in the middle of the building. Well, it got so hot, the kids had papers sticking to their arms, and what I did was I finally got myself a little blackboard, and 7th period, it got so hot I'd take them outside on the porch, and I'd teach them trigonometry, sitting on the porch with a blackboard.
I remember that excitement, those big wide hallways compared to the smaller classrooms and smaller hallways and a big gym and the auditorium. On the other hand, I remember that the outside was incomplete, so there was no place to walk outside because it was muddy and not landscaped yet.
You know, we were suffering through that first year, you know, without the air conditioning, without the food and all that kind of stuff. And we knew that next year was going to have to be better.
Remember the excitement of the new facility. And there was a lot of places to hide, too, because the teachers didn't know all the hiding spots. So there was a lot of places that we would have the opportunity to explore that maybe nobody knew very well. The teachers wised up in a hurry.
The library had almost no books, or very few books, you know.
There was a big room, We had no furniture. The furniture had not come in yet. I think that there was a concern about financing, whatever. And pretty soon, we realized that we had to operate out of the boxes of books that we had. And eventually, before Christmas, the furniture began to come in and they began putting it together.
I think the first use of the library was my use of it. First week of school, I had two students that were fighting, nothing really serious, you know. And I put them in the library looking at each other for about 6 hours, about 10 feet apart, and I said, y'all look at each other. So, you know, but that was the first use of the library. I thought it was funny.
Had some vents, and you pass by the vents, you could see people who were in there, and you holler their name. She threw me out for a month and said, go see Mr. Hebert. So I went to see Mr. Hebert, and Mr. Hebert threw me out for a month. And then I went to see the assistant principal was Easton Pete. I went to see him. He threw me out for a month. So I had 3 months that I couldn't go into the library, which was okay with me.
See, you have furniture there in this library that came from my library. I call it my library. And it's still unscratched. The superintendent at the time was Mr. DeFelice, and sat in the cafeteria having coffee with the principal. So Mr. Hebert came to the library and he says, you have to come have coffee. I said, I don't have time. He says, you have to have coffee. So when I went in there, Mr. Hebert says, she needs some books. And he says, how much do you think that you need? I said, well, I need encyclopedias, I need dictionaries, I don't have anything. I had to leave that because others could use them. He says, what would you say to 10,000? I said, I like that.
Both Donna and I were 21 years old, wet behind the ears, had never been in a classroom, and our first day of teaching, we're both on duty. Now we're 21 and some of these kids are 19. So we came in the middle of a semester. They didn't know us from Adam. We were just another new kid on the block. So when we got here at 7 o'clock, Donna says, I'm going to hyperventilate. I cannot go on duty alone. You have to come on duty with me. I said, gosh, I don't know if I can do that. We might get fired our first day here. But we went on duty together. She had the gymnasium mall, and I had the outside area, the bus ramp. So we start off, boy, we were so excited. And we walk down the gymnasium mall, and we head down the boys' basketball hall. And lo and behold, I get out on under the canopy, and somebody's lighting a cigarette and asks me for a cigarette lighter. And so I looked at her, she's shaking. She says, what are we gonna do? I said, I know what I'm doing. We're going to the office. He said, but you can't bring me to the office. You're just a student. I said, no, I'm not. I'm a teacher. And so from that first minute, we established ourselves and we brought him to the office. And he fussed all the way up there, but I had been brought up with both Millers, and discipline was key. And so I've been a disciplinarian for 44 years, and I still am.
I was young, I was only 21 years old, had no sense of authority, and I was totally overwhelmed. I remember that I had to just stand the whole time to try to be taller than the boys, because they were taller than I am, you know. So that was quite a shock. It was a tough first year, and I felt that I was more a policewoman than a teacher. And without people like Easton Petrie, for instance, a mentor helping, I think I could, at one point I was not going back. I thought I would not get through it, but somehow I did.
We had 7 periods, totally different from what you see now. We, first of all, in those days, we started with a late start. I don't remember exactly what time, but probably 8:15, 8:20, we would ring the bell and everybody would go to a homeroom for 10 minutes. I don't think they have homerooms today, but the teachers would find out how many students would eat in the cafeteria that day, check to see who was absent, who was not absent, you know, who was present, and this kind of thing. It was probably a 10-minute administration period. I was responsible for making announcements on the intercom system as to what was going on that day.
My classroom work was teaching agri-science education in here. A big part of our program that a lot of people don't understand is leadership training also. Teaching parliamentary procedure and public speaking, which at the time we were the only class that they could get it from. And I'm proud to say we turned out people that were lawyers and doctors and stuff like that, and they credit their training in parliamentary law and public speaking to helping them get into these professions.
The rest of the day was pretty much organized in a different way than it is today. We had 3 straight class periods, first, second, third period, no breaks in between.
The way the English department and I set up the learning process of research, the 10th graders came in and learned what bibliography was, and just did a bibliography. It didn't matter whether they did it on dogs or whatever, but they learned how to set up a bibliography.
You might come here and have 4 classes, then a break, and then 2 more classes. Or you may start the day with your off hour and teach 6 classes in a row. And the classes were only about 50 minutes each.
Then our 4th period was kind of unique. I think it was around 11:35, the 3rd period would end, and at that time, half of the students would go to a 25-minute break, and they would go to the cafeteria to have lunch, and then spend another 5 or 10 minutes just socializing in the hall. Of course, the remainder of the class, student body, would be in the classroom at that time.
There were 7 periods, but one of those periods was an activity period, kind of in the middle of the day, where we would have club meetings and stuff like that. Was that right? So we had an opportunity to meet with clubs or something during the day, if I'm not mistaken. So we got to know a few people during around lunchtime. You'd have a little extended period where you could meet or recess or whatever the case.
25 minutes later, those students would go to class, and of course they would begin their class. The ones who had been in class before were in their second half of the class, and after 30 minutes they would go to lunch and have that class, and then everybody was through by, say, 1 o'clock, and that was considered our 4th period. And then at 5th period we had a regular class, and then at 6th period was again a little unique that I don't think they have today. At 6th period we would have what we call a study hall period, and there was no classes, but every teacher had a group of students at that time.
I had a locker by every room that I had a class in. Rather than one locker with all my books. If I had algebra, I had my algebra book next to the algebra class. If I had English, I had the English books next to the English class. That way I wouldn't have to carry books all over the place.
How did he get that? I don't remember that. You maybe?
I don't remember getting multiple lockers.
Oh man,
You must have been privileged over there.
Yeah, D hall, C hall. I had a locker in every hall. They wouldn't have to carry any books.
And then of course, our 7th period was back to academics again. We'd have a 7th period class.
So the first year I had a partial year and I had a class that was really not mine. So it was a tough start. I didn't take over in September, you know.
We went according to the Lafourche Parish School Board calendar, which was not only for our school, it's for all the schools. But yes, in those days you recognize more holidays, religious holidays, I should say.
A young man that was in here for the first year, Mr. Tedman Collins, he was another one that was about 5'2". But he had good discipline, and he knew his diesel, and he turned out some good diesel mechanics.
As the senior class came in, that is where it was hands-on learning how to do a research paper. So it was a progressive thing. Nichols came in with all kinds of thank yous and everything because students got to Nichols and actually knew how to find something.
I had that calcium deposit in my arm, and I was going to go play college football, so the doctor says we got to take it out. you know. So they went in there and removed it. Well, it was towards, and I had to take, it was after it was right at the end of school during May. And I had like 5 term papers due for different classes and all, because we were jamming us up. Well, I couldn't type or anything. So fortunately, with the help of some of the friends that I had like 5 different girls do my 5 different term papers. So that really helped me out, because they were all a lot smarter than I was.
My wife, Brenda Weber, was, they had 2 home ec teachers. Mrs. Joyce, she was Ms. Joyce Stelly then, and she later married Roland Chermy, Mrs. Roland Chermy. She was the cooking end of it, and my wife was the sewing end of it. So they had a teamwork going. They had a real good program.
We had the philosophy that every student had a place in life, and it may not be a doctor, it may not be maybe a trawler. There was nothing wrong with that, you know. And we tried to give everybody an opportunity, and we had 4 years of English, and we had, yes, you're right, we had 2 or 3 years of French. Mr. Gidders spoke French, taught the French class. Mr. Roland Thomasy taught the Latin classes. Mrs. Surpass taught the Spanish classes. So we had foreign languages. We had all the math you wanted, trigonometry, solid geometry, you know, and you know, so if you really wanted to go to university or college somewhere, you got a very good academic background. At the same time, we had ag, we had industrial arts, we had drafting, woodworking, we had diesel mechanics, we had home economics, you know, and I could say on and on. For someone who said, well, no, you know, I'm not going to college. I just want to go into a trade or something, and you know, I want to do something different. So we tried to reach all the students that way, and yes, we had a very diversified curriculum.
The teachers did a great job as far as putting the school together and keep it going, and because the conditions weren't good, you know, as far as air conditioning and all, but it was a beautiful school. It was brand new, and I couldn't go outside. That was another thing. You know, you had right now you have an opportunity to go outside and just kind of relax a little bit, because there wasn't any grass at all. It was just strictly dirt.
The technology was far from being what it is today. In fact, I told these kids, I spoke to a class here last year, and I told them, I said, you know, if I'd had a graphics calculator or something like that, I said, I'd have been somewhere else today, probably.
We had manual typewriters. In fact, I donated my manual typewriter that I had to the Golden Medal it's a museum. There's a typewriter in there, which was one of the original 60 typewriters of South Lafourche High School. That was one of the typewriters from South Lafourche High School. Dario Thomasy taught most of the typing in the school. You know, going back to training young people to do jobs instead of going to university. We had cooperative office education, distributive education with Mr. Roland Chermy, Mr. Alvin DeVore. We had a tremendous number of classes in commerce. I mean, all kinds, shorthand. You'd sit over here and the boss would say, okay, take this letter, and she'd do shorthand, you know, while he's talking, and then she'd go back there and type on the Underwood manual typewriter.
We took, probably all of us, I think it was mandatory, took typing classes. Of course, there was no computers, so we learned to type on typewriters.
At the time when we were teaching, we didn't have calculators. In fact, I remember going to college and using what they call a slide rule, and which was not very accurate, not a very accurate way of multiplying and finding logs.
We didn't have computers. We didn't have calculators. We had adding machines and slide rules.
When I got word that there was such a thing as a computer-geared cataloging system, I convinced the powers that be that I absolutely had to have the computer. Now, did I know how to use the computer? No. Took the manual home and learned how to use a computer, learned how to use the program, and we just went by leaps and bounds from there.
There was a lot of things in commerce that were, in those days, they were brand new. I think you're laughing at them, but you know, Underwood manual typewriter, that was first class. I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years, 9 years later, they came out with the Selectric electric typewriter. Oh, what a great, you know, then the word processor.
In PE, they had uniforms, and we've run the gamut. We could, We could put on a fashion show. The ones I think they hated the most was in one year they had an all-in-one that would snap, and it was like so uncomfortable because of course they wanted to look good, so they got it to fit their bodies, but they couldn't move in it.
Children didn't have cars either. They rode the school bus. I became the school bus for the neighborhood where I lived, brought my sister to school and some of the neighbors.
I lived close enough to school that I kind of say hitchhike, but I just walk out and stand on the side of the road, and somebody driving to school would pick me up.
Very few people had their own cars at that time, and of course I was driving my daddy's car, not my own. And you know, but you'd pick up your friends. The car was full by the time you got to school, of course. And then we didn't have a South Lafourche Bridge then, so you either had to go to Cutoff or Galliana to get across the bayou.
We didn't have automobiles to go back to school back and forth, you know. Like Hank, he said he had to hitchhike, you know, sometimes on the side of the road, hope somebody would pick him up, or, you know, vice versa, or, you know, carpooling to come back from, you know, practice or staying after school.
The first year that I taught down here, I took a little poll and I asked my senior students, how many of you can speak French? All except 2 could speak French.
As I recall, the coaches would coach like some of our offensive line or defensive line. They would call some blocking assignments in French against the opponent, so they could.
Teaching taught me how to fail, because you failed every day. You failed every class. Every time you were in a situation, there was always a mistake you made. And the point is, you had to learn, if you were a teacher who loved the students, that didn't matter. You know, you were never in competition with them. They were the prime need. They were the prime candidate.
Because my heart is true, she said, baby.
They had a foreign language club. They had, I wasn't in ROTC, but they had a real good ROTC program.
We had a little fella, Sergeant Carl Williams. He was about 5'2". And brother, let me tell you, he could be a stern disciplinarian, but they loved him.
3 units. We had a band. We had a marching group. Joe Petito was our first commander, and he chose him because he was 6'6".
We had over 200, I think they said 250 students that first year. And a lot of these kids would come through this, and they would go right into ROTC in college or go into the military. We had some good leaders that come out of that.
You know, it depends on the interests of the students. At one time or another, for example, kids were interested a great deal in chess. So we had a chess club. We had one of our teachers here, Mr. Tom Becknell. He was a big chess person, so he liked that. We also had a photography club because Mr. Becknell was into photography big time, and the kids would give their own time, you know, to do all of this kind of stuff. So what it is the idea was that we had the manpower, we had the people that wanted to do this kind of thing, and so if the students really wanted to try to have some club or some activity, then we had it.
And yearbook committee or club, you know, prepare for the yearbook, you know. A lot of the different we had new clubs, but there were new clubs that came from Golden Meadow that we didn't particularly have maybe at LCO. So they brought that over, and we brought some ours, so it mixed pretty good.
But all the students that we had, we were able to have clubs that we were unable to have in the smaller schools.
I remember, I like to get involved in almost everything, but some things didn't. You know, at Golden Meadow, one of my favorite things was square dancing. Can you believe that was a PE course we take?
Yeah, well, we had what we called the Math Science Club, and Mr. Alec Brew and I were advisors for those kids that were interested in math and science, and we'd have them do math projects and science projects and take them to the local science fair out there at Nichols and so on.
And so at one time we had something like about maybe 30 or so different clubs and activities. You know, you had the newspaper, you had the yearbook, and You had all the athletic teams.
We had a wonderful football team, but you know, we had played LCO. I'd gone to so many Golden Meta LCO games, and LCO always won.
That was another thing of anticipation that was going on, because who was going to be the head coach, you know, and it was Dan Danos from LCO. And at LCO, we had won the state championship so that year as juniors. And Ray and all, they went to the semifinals, I think it was, in that classification. So we had a good group of athletes coming together that all wanted to start, you know, and play football. So it created a tremendous amount of competition, which I think really made us better at the end, you know.
We had no practice fields or anything, so we had to bus everywhere we went. We either bused to Golden Meadow Elementary or LaRose Cutoff to practice and stuff, and so, and all of us being on the bus, you know, 2 or 3 bus loads, I mean, that half hour one way, half hour the other way, we could really bond.
And the bus, we had to push it to start. And if you didn't have a good day of either offense or defense, well, the offense would have to push, the offensive line and get out and push it, or a defensive line. And
Len and I, we both were injured early in the year before the first game, and we had to go see Dr. Boulay every day and get our shots and
you
know,
things
you had a big old bone spur, and I had a blister.
Yeah, had a calcium deposit. Yeah, but
so.
But that put the football team really, I think, put South Lafourche on the map, so to speak. You know, new school and all this stuff. And
the running of the backfield, the passes of the quarterbacks, the blocking from tackle to tackle, and the routes of the receivers. The points always seem to pile up for the Big Blue offense. But on Friday night, as the thunder rolls off of the Gulf of Mexico, you can hear a voice say softly, "Hold 'em, brick wall."
South of Lafourche where the hurricanes blow. We got a team everyone's gonna know. It's a team with a lot of heart, and the defense will tear you apart. Brick wall! Brick wall!
First game, it was pretty intense going through that tunnel, not knowing what was going to happen on that field. But the thing that I remember was that, and I don't think any football program at South Lafourche High School has done this, since we went 10-0 our regular season. We were undefeated that first year. I don't think any other class has gone 10-0. Now there's two other classes that won the state championship, and some of them have won more games. But our regular season we were undefeated, and we lost in the state championship game. So we made it to state, but we got beat by Broadmoor in that game. So that, I think, really got South Lafourche Tarpons on the map. My aunt next door, a couple of houses down from us, they're all into football and found out their schools. He says, and my cousin Sammy, who played football with us, and he went to play Canadian football, she came up to me and said, "What kind of, every game you win, I'll bake you a pie." So I took custard pie, and my cousin took pecan pie. Pecan pie, I think it was. So anyway, we won 10 games in a row. So every Saturday morning, I had a pie sitting on the table for me. So that's how much the people got into it.
We moved into a different classification, so now we're playing against the big schools in New Orleans. Our first game was against West Jefferson, and I was, and I think most of us were very apprehensive about playing against some tough guys from New Orleans area in a different class who had a reputation of being tough players. So in a sense, that really united us, because we couldn't fight against each other. There was another opponent out there, and I think our coaches probably used that appropriately.
They scored in 5 plays. We kicked off to them, and they scored in 5 plays. And I'll never forget, me and Bobby Russo running off the field, and I told Bob, I said, "Man, this is going to be a long game." He said, "Man, this is going to be a long season." Anyway, during the game going on, I think, Ray, you intercepted a pass, huh?
No.
Who was it intercepted?
We blocked the field goal.
Blocked the field goal, that's what it was.
We had scored in about 5 plays. I think Cantrell broke loose about the 4-5.
Tied it up.
And then we tied it up, and then they ran that off balance thing, remember? And then we finally figured out how to stop them. We blitzed the cornerbacks and stopped them. And then they tried a field goal, and Cliff Lombard's blocked it. And the ball bounced right in front of all the coaches, and I can still see Dan Danos say, "Pick it up, pick it up."
And you know, you remember my speed.
Oh yeah, that's what
I was really worried about.
That's what I was going to comment on. You were like a.
But I did make it.
You were like a blaze going down there. Yeah, I think it was Lobos running backwards.
He might have.
Keeping up with you.
And we were fortunate enough in that first game to have a big win, and really boosted our confidence and our camaraderie. And the stage was set that we had a very successful first year in football.
But as the year went on, Hank was our quarterback. And not too many high school quarterbacks had the opportunity to do this. But Dan Danos would call the first 3 plays in the locker room. He said, okay, guys, I want you to concentrate in the first 3 plays. So we'd go and we'd run those 3 plays. And then he'd give Hank the green light and call his own plays from then on. Not many high school quarterbacks that could do that or could say they had the opportunity to do that. So
they don't do it now.
No, you know, so it was.
Still don't do it.
It was a testimony to how they prepared us.
A lot of people may know this, but some may not. You know, we had the privilege of playing the semifinal game in Sugar Bowl Stadium, which was the Tulane Stadium, but it was also where the Sugar Bowl was played. And we played the final game in LSU Tiger Stadium. So many of us, Lynn played college ball, but most people's careers ended at high school. And to be able to have played in Sugar Bowl Stadium and Tiger Stadium was quite an honor for some high school boys.
Well, in that football class, we had our first All-American, which was Darryl Rishu. You know, so that was a high honor for the first year of a football program to have a football player, you know, become an All-American. And then we had several of them that, I think, out of the first 2 years, the senior year and junior year, we had 21 college offers to go play college football out of the athletes. So, you know, there
we
were some
had
high honors there.
10 all-district, 2 all-state, and an all-American. So we had 13 players in that team that made all-district or better.
In basketball, we only lost 1 game in the regular season. And we went to the semifinals, I think, right before it was the top 20 back then. 1 game before, and it was South Terrebonne that beat us in the regular season. So we were successful in athletics.
The newspaper, for example, was called the Silver King Times. And as I showed you in our yearbook, we had a cheering squad of just girls. And we always wanted to bring in the cultural aspect, you know, the French of the community. And so they were called les filles, the girls. And it was a squad, as I showed you in the picture, a squad of girls. And they went and dressed up, you know, in their uniforms and went to the games. One of the things that we did, we came up with the crest. This is the crest here. Well, what are you looking for? Well, you're looking for tarpons, and you see all the symbols of learning on there. And at the very bottom, you have the motto. That's the school motto, tant que je peux. Okay. And that means as much as I can. So you're giving as much as you can. And so this is on the school letterhead, the principal's letterhead, and on some of our yearbooks. When I became principal here in the late 80s, I had one of the jackets replicated, you know, like the ones that our kids used to wear when they represented the school. And I showed you earlier about the basketball team when they traveled. And once again, the idea is that you want to make things as nice as you can. And this is absolutely, and what happened is that when we got some new uniforms for the band, this is on all the band uniforms, and some of the other uniforms you'll notice. But what we did is, what I did is when I became principal, I bought 2 of those, this one and the one I have on, and I had the blue blazer already, so my wife put it on.
And it's amazing how the senior class president is from LCO and the student council president is from Golden Miller. It's amazing that the student class, I mean, the Mr. South Lafourche for that year is from LCO, but Miss South Lafourche is from Golden Miller. You know, the Queen homecoming is from Golden Miller. The president of this club is from LCO. I mean, they was never say, well, we're going to vote for this one because she's from LCO, you know?
So what we were looking for is we were going to have a big school here. It wasn't a small school where 15 people could be in the student council. This is going to be a large school with hundreds and hundreds of kids in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. Well, in order to be able to get enough representation for everybody, for everyone, we had some school-wide offices, like for example, the president, vice president, and, you know, normal kind of situation. And then we wanted to also try to bring in everyone else that we could. So what we did is we had the three branches of government, like I just mentioned now. That was the executive branch with the president and what have you. And we had the president would appoint the justices and also, well, the chief justice, I should say, and justices. And if there was a problem that came up and we needed opinions or help to, you know, get the story across, these are the people that would help. And then we wanted an upper house, which was the Senate. Now in the Senate, you had the president from each class, like the seniors, juniors, and sophomores, and the president of each one of the clubs and activities. That was the Senate. The House of Representatives was representatives from each one of the classes. Like for example, and what we did is we made it possible for the seniors to have it was weighted. In other words, they had a little bit more authority. They had like 4 representatives, and the juniors had 3, sophomores had 2. So that was the lower house. And when we would meet, they would meet in at different times. And whatever they had on their mind, they would bring it up. We'd talk about it and then go from one house to the next. And here again, the idea was to involve as many people as you could and to listen to what they had to say. Now, interestingly enough, we also made it possible to amend the Constitution. Fortunately, we did that because there were no 9th graders at the time, but you have now. So there would have been no place for 9th graders. So that had to be, I think it's been amended twice in 40-some years. That's all. It's difficult. It is based on the 2/3 majority, just like your regular government. And interestingly enough, as I said, there have been very few times that we've had any problems where people felt that they were left out or that they were not heard. Because after all, that's what's important. You got to be heard. So to this day, it's still operational. It's still like it was then.
We had more boys, don't ask me, that's nature. But we had more boys from Golden Meadow that was all of a sudden dating LCO girls, and more boys from LCO dating Golden Meadow girls, you know?
Seen the Golden Meadow guys who was interested in the LCO girls, and the LCO guys were interested in the Golden Meadow girls.
Well, that's the only reason I liked Rick, because he knew a lot of the Golden Meadow girls.
I'm just saying we meshed. This faculty was an outstanding faculty. We really worked together, and the students did too.
Mr. Rabb and I were both very, very proud of this model. I don't know of anywhere else exactly like it. And the main thing is that students know that they're going to be heard.
Listen, baby, ain't no mountain high, ain't no valley low, ain't no river wide enough, baby.
It seemed like the Monkees was hot in those days. You know, hey, hey, with the Monkees, you know, that kind of stuff. And
yeah, you're right there.
And then
wasn't it in the late 60s that the Beatles hit the scene too?
that was in the early 60s, early 60s.
Early 60s.
But Otis Redding, he was pretty popular that time too. A lot of soul
Sitting on the
music.
dock. 2 places that I particularly remember. One was the Ritz Garden, which is no longer in existence, on Highway 1, kind of riding in the border of Cutoff and Galliana, which was, they had bands there and we'd rendezvous there. And there was also a place called Besson's, which there's Besson's Motel. I don't even know if it exists.
Like a hamburger joint kind of.
But that was another place that we hung out a lot.
And they built a little dance hall on the
Dance hall
side.
in the
It
back.
started off as a little hamburger joint, and they built a dance hall on the side of it, and I think we started going there. That's true. I forgot about that.
And the Ritz Garden was the same thing, had a lounge in the front. And the back was, you know, open to dancing, and the bands would come in and all that, so everybody would kind of meet there.
The Ritz Garden was the place to go, and what's his name, Uncle Potts from Raceland, his band would play, but you know, a lot of it was rhythm and blues, that sort of thing. It was Jitterbugs. The Twist came out when we first started high school, probably. The Ritz Garden was run by my uncle, Bertman Petrie, and you know, they had an oak dance floor in the back. There was a powder or something they put on there. You could dance on that floor. That was a real floor. Fridays was teenagers, Saturdays were grown-ups.
You wanted to dress nice. I mean, we didn't, I don't think we wore blue jeans. Well, I guess we did. We probably wore some blue jeans, but we did wear slacks. And
Another thing we would do is Ray was, family lived on Grand Isle,
Right.
and in the summertime, Grand Isle was a great hangout spot, and then we were in his territory. And that sometimes got to be a little nervous because we were sometimes uninvited guests, but there was great places to hang out. Ray's family had a hotel, motel business there, and we had some good memories from summertime on Grand Isle.
Yeah. Later in the year, we were going to do a party on Grand Isle, and they wanted to go in front of my dad's motel to do this. And my dad told me, he said, the only beer I want to see is root beer. So I told that to the guys. Told that to Lynn and said, okay, everybody can come, but you remember, no beer. The only beer we could have is root beer. Since then, we've been calling each other root beer.
Yeah.
We always take my car, 'cause it's never been beat, and we've never missed yet with the girls we meet. None of the guys go steady, 'cause it wouldn't be right to leave your best girl home on a Saturday night. I get around, round, round, I get around. 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 I get around.
What I remember, one of the organizations towards the end of the year was planning on our senior trip, and I was the vice president of that part, the play and the senior trip, and spent many hours working on the play, which was a very successful program. So that was the program. That was what I participated in.
The play was a variety show with the idea of raising money to help offset some of our expense to go to New York and Washington as a senior class. And there was a lot of effort that was put into that play, but we had a great time.
But it was a grand old, the name of it was a grand old flag, and it was the history of the United States from the very beginning to that point. So it was fun doing it. It was nice.
Ray was quite a singer because he had some starring roles in the class
Grand old
variety
flag.
clubs.
It was
practice and then
so
pulling it
successful that we had we did it another night.
We
We did two nights because of a popular demand, and I think the superintendent of schools saw the play, and he wanted us to do another night, a third night at a different area. Let some of the other schools to see it, and but we just didn't have enough time. It was too close to graduation.
When we were preparing to select a ring, there were several presenters. Well, one of the presenters was Warren Rabb, and Warren Rabb was the quarterback for the LSU 1958 championship. So he already had, I think he had us from hello, if you will, and he was a pretty charismatic and a good salesman. And I think in the final analysis, it wouldn't have mattered what kind of ring he was selling. We wanted to buy from Warren Rabb. I don't know if any of y'all were in that meeting, but he presented, he was representing a company that sold graduation materials, and particularly the class ring. And I remember being quite impressed. My vote was for whatever Warren Rabb was selling.
That was a very special assignment. We had, in Golden Meadow, we had Mrs. Schwess, who was a long-time teacher. She came in the 30s to Golden Meadow. She had been there, and with Mr. Miller, and they ran a very strict school, I'm telling you, And so graduation was a very formal activity. I'm talking about the boys had to wear certain color shoes, the girls certain color shoes, and you couldn't wear just any colored tie and all that kind of. It was very formal, you know, and dignified. You know, I have to say that. And when Mrs. Schwess retired, I was teaching American history at the time, and she was the English teacher, but Mr. Miller, the principal, told me, he said, you know, Ms. Schwess is leaving. I said, yes, and he said, you know, she had a lot of faith in you, so you taking her place to take care of graduation. And I have to tell you that it's a great experience.
I also remember that Governor John McKithen was the governor at the time, and we were fortunate enough that because of Representative Dick Guidry's relationship with the governor, he invited him and he attended our graduation. So we had the governor as the guest speaker at the first graduation of South Lafourche.
As far as the graduation is concerned, it was always some, you know, whoever sponsored the senior class took care of it here. But we're coming from a graduation class like in Golden Meadow of about 50 or 60 people to the first one I think was 200 and whatever here at South Lafourche.
Graduation in May was like, oh, what a great year we've had, you know, and first graduates of 67.
And when we came here, teachers would take turns being sponsors of different activities and different groups.
Yeah, I think Mr. and Mrs. Rabwell's class sponsors actually.
He and Coach Boudreaux.
Right.
Coach Boudreaux, they came to the senior trip with us.
Yeah.
But you know what? Teachers were dedicated and they wanted to do this, you know?
Not many schools take their kids on a Greyhound bus to Washington, D.C., and then you fly home from New York.
On our trip to New York,
We went to see the
we went to the
Supremes.
Copacabana,
Right.
and the Supremes, the original Supremes were there. And we got to see them there. You remember that?
Yeah. That was
pretty neat.
Our kids were generally well behaved, you know? And you got to remember now, you know, these are 18 years old, and they're just starting to experience what goes on in the world. So it was nice. We always enjoyed it, you know. We always had 7 different classes that we took.
Remember Dan Danos telling us, you will be good, or you'll begin being good after your first class graduates. So in that high school, it was 3 years. So his whole point was when you begin year 4 and you've seen a whole crew get through to graduation, then you will be probably learning how to be a teacher.
I spoke to a young man, and he was a senior. I didn't realize he was a senior in that class. And he says, and I said it's a compliment because, again, you know, it's what you complimented with teachers. He says, you and Mr. Steve Stahl were my 2 father figures. You know, and that means a lot to a teacher, you know, when you say that to you.
I don't mind if you got something nice to say about me. And I enjoy an accolade like the rest. And you could take my picture and hang it in a gallery of all the who's and so-and-sos that used to be the best.
Prof. George Hebert, Papa George, said, everybody thought that Papa George was strictly football and athletics and all that. When he'd come in and he'd have a new group of teachers, he'd say, now look, all extracurricular activities are good. They teach leadership. They can't all be athletes, so get with them and do the best you can, and we did.
What happened was kind of unique. I was offered the job by my prior principal, George Hebert, and he was my advocate. He was wonderful. So I got the job, came in during the Christmas holidays, got the textbooks and worked on everything. And then by coincidence, in my classroom at LSU, the guy behind me was describing his job, which was the same job I had had. So I called Mr. Hebert that night, and what had happened was the superintendent had gone along and offered a job to this man, and I had the same offering. So I called him and had no idea what was going to happen next. So at that time, it was a battle of the 2 men, and George Hebert was quite commanding and ended up saying, do not turn those books in, you will be here. So I ended up there.
I was in his office one day. I spent a little bit of time in there. And we were just talking and all, and someone asked him, and I think it was someone from Thibodeau that come in from the supervisory part of the school system, and asked him, what would you consider the ideal student, you know, or what is the ideal student? And I remember him saying, there is an ideal student in every child here. You just got to go bring it out of them. And that stuck with me. And that's the kind of principal he was. Whether you were on the misbehaved list or the best list, that didn't matter to him. He looked at you as an individual and wanted the best for you, you know.
Did you go back and teach there?
Yeah.
Was Miss Daybear still the principal when you got there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure did. And he pulled me in his office and said, hey, I'm behind you 100%. Do what you have to do.
We did have a tragedy our senior year too. We lost one of our classmates in an automobile accident, which
Dan Beasley.
In a freak automobile accident. So that was a tragic event that we all went through as seniors in a new school.
A teacher that came from Golden Meadow, he didn't teach me at South Lafourche, and that was Roland Boudreau. Coach Boudreau was my mentor when I was a kid, basketball coach from the 7th grade on, and just my friend. You know, he was just a great man, amongst others, you know, but he's the one that I remember the most.
I think Lloyd Guidry probably was the most important person because I had worked with him in student council for the whole time I was in high school, and he was an excellent teacher also. There was so much interaction between teachers and students at that time. They were wonderful people, knew your family, you did exactly what you needed to do. But there were so many good people out there too. And then once when I got close to the Rabs, we were blessed with that.
I'd have to say Eddie Blanchard. He was a math teacher, and came from LCO with us, and was real instrumental into putting me where I am today. Really, I guess, you know. So he was a strong influence in my life, really.
Yeah, I remember Eddie and Blanchard and Jesse Guidry as excellent math teachers, and also was taught by John Rabb, who challenged me at one time. I remember, I've told this story recently. It's funny how you remember these things, but I turned in a paper that I didn't put a very good effort in, and he didn't give me a grade. He just said, you can do better than this, is all he wrote in my paper. And I was motivated because of those words from a high school teacher to do better. So he had an influence. Mr. Rabb had a way of figuring out how to bring that student out of you that Ms. Abraham was talking about.
Well, the person who I most admired before electing the curriculum that I did was John Rabb. John Rabb was our history teacher, and he was probably the person who had the life I wanted. He came in from out of town and brought these little country people into the bigger world. And he loved students, and he loved learning, and he loved teaching, and I wanted what he had. And the ironic thing is, he kind of paralleled my life through all of this, because first he taught me, and then when I went to work at South, he was curriculum director. So he had a main influence he was a second or third administrator, you know. He was able to have freedom to work with students and with teachers, and he tried to simplify and just say, you know, it's the child. And of course, that's what he always had done. He took people into his home. He changed their lives. So he was a main influence. And also the English teachers, because I had no background in being an English teacher. I had Mrs. Showes. She was my senior teacher, and then she was head of the department. And there was a Mr. Cowart, who was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. The staff was great. He was an English teacher. There was a Mr. Faust. And what I remember first about that year, he would, at the long lunch period, he would close the door to his room and put on classical music, and he was right next door to me. And that was his relaxing, that was his recovery, that was his oasis. And then on the other wall, through the other wall, I could hear Mrs. New crowing like a rooster because she was teaching Julius Caesar. You know, so all of these people had a great influence on me, and they were very helpful. And when we jumped right into that other program, we had to help each other. There was a lot of team teaching, sharing and stimulating one another and creating. We created each day, each year.
You raise me up to more than I can be.
I welcome the opportunity to be able to share with you, and I just wish that everyone could have had this experience.
As a faculty coming from two different high schools, I think that first year we were able to establish, I think, a unified school, and we had a unified goal. I think we all realized that we needed to get the communities together.
I would like to thank the administration, the two faculties that merged and merged so well. And I think everyone in that school that year learned that this community was one. And they helped us to understand that more clearly than anything. And then I am so thankful too that I graduated with my Golden Meta friends, and then all of these other people from LaRose also.
You see, this was one big family. You know, in a way, I was ready to retire, but not really. But the biggest thing that I hated to leave at that point in time was all the teacher family that we had.
The teachers loved teaching, and they loved the children.
The sad part about it was we only had 1 year with that class. That's true. We never had the opportunity to go from sophomore to juniors to seniors. And now even better, because there's 9th grade now.
We had a great faculty, we had a great student body, and the staff. We had a great staff. Janitors, what are you going to call them? Janitors, cooks, secretaries? You know, we just had one big family. And that's what it is today. South Lafourche High School is one big family. South Lafourche community is one big family.
Well, they did it. The 1966-67 school year was officially over. The faculty and staff not only survived that first year, they cherished it, all while teaching new students at a new school alongside new teachers. The students also survived that first year. They made instrumental decisions that still shape and guide students 43 years later. While the sophomores and juniors had 1 or 2 more years left to enjoy South Lafourche High School, the seniors had graduated and moved on to either college, the military, or the workforce. Many students from the graduating class of 1967 have become local and national leaders in the world today. The faculty and staff of 1967 continue teaching and instilling timeless values in the students who came through their doors. While many have retired and some have passed away, no one, including students, faculty, and staff, will ever forget their first year at South Lafourche High School. I guess it's because while the 60s is a culture in itself identified by hippies, the civil rights movement, and the Vietnam War, for the community of South Lafourche, it was a time period filled with fond memories because it was the start of something new, the creation of the Big Blue.
Kid on the way, babe, a family on my mind. I'm fortified for a moment. The sea is high and I'm heading into war crisis, chasing the years of my life. 15, there's still time for you. Time to buy and time to lose.
to live. Half time goes by, suddenly you're wise. Another blink of an eye, 67 is gone, the sun is getting high. We're moving on. I'm 99 for a moment, I'm dying for just another moment, and I'm just dreaming, counting the